So I'm going to go over what the past 2 months have taught us about product strategy. Obviously, the 2 months we're talking about is since most of the entire world started working from home, and it affected a lot of businesses, particularly on the digital product front. And so, since that time, myself, Christian Beck, and Anna Eaglin have switched our Better Product podcast to focus on talking to product leaders that are just trying to figure things out right away. Our previous version of the podcast was really talking about product leaders and about the things they were doing to be successful and for us to all learn and be inspired by those things. But once all of this started happening, we realized that what people really needed was to learn what people are trying right now, whether it's working or not, but just hear from other leaders. So what I wanted to do today is summarize a lot of the key things that we've learned from talking to some of these people, and we'll bring in some of the key quotes that we got from those interviews through the months of March and April on this podcast. So the four main things that stick with us are the focusing on customers, which some of these, well, let me just actually start. A lot of these insights are not going to be earth-shattering or new, and they shouldn't be, but I think what they mean at a time like this has changed. But focusing on customers. Number two, finding and sticking to your value. Three, be careful not to overreact. And then ending with what we're hearing a lot of people is really act in the short term, but think about the long-term ramifications. So let's get into what these insights mean. So starting with focusing on your customers, what does that mean over the last 2 months and maybe for the next several months? The best way that I felt that we heard this was holding a mirror to your clients to sort of reflect back to them, what's going on. Listening to them is really something that most product leaders do when they're starting, new projects or new products from the ground up. You go out, you listen to the market, figuring out what they need. But in these times of uncertainty where we have less confidence in what the market needs, you need to go back to what got you here. And that's really with listening. I think Amy Brown, the CEO and founder of Authentics, put this best.
So when thinking about introducing this feature, how I think about it is that we're tuning the mirror, tuning our ears to the parts of the conversation that are most relevant to the customers right now. I think the whole world is looking for ways where they can help.
And Amy Brown also leads to another component of focusing on your customers, which is to be authentic. She's the CEO of Authentics, but also to be helpful. There's actually this interesting thing that's happened where a lot of us, I think a lot of people have sort of stepped back to not to not really inundate customers that are already busy doing other things. But it's important to understand that if you have something that can help in the moment, help them get their job done, help them with the transition to home, whatever that is, you have a responsibility to offer it. This is even something that we've done at our own agency. We've actually listened to our customers, our existing clients, and found that their needs were starting to change, and they weren't asking us because they didn't think it was something that we did. It's not something we have traditionally done, but there's ways that we help them now that we weren't doing it before. So I think the same thing works with product leaders is as you start to listen and understand what they need, find ways to help them rather than thinking about, does this fit in with my roadmap? Is this where I want to be in 3 years? Throw some of that out of the window and just focus on being authentic and helpful. The last part of focusing on your customers is really all about focusing on their changing needs. This is something we heard really early on. I got this advice in a private conversation I was having with the CEO in the Indy area, and he told me a lot about how he was surprised immediately that a lot of what their value prop was changing. So it wasn't that people found his product less valuable today than they did before. It was what they found valuable had changed. So you may see that even in your daily life. Some of the things like we we really like puzzles. But what value that provides us when we're stuck at home has changed immensely. So you think about like, well, at least my family itself has gone through probably 30 plus puzzles over the last 2 months. So I think about whereas this is just a way to sort of like engage with people and do something challenging. Now it becomes your sort of home away from home. So the value prop of what your product provides, at least in this time, might change. Maybe before you had a value prop of, say, this helps your team scale, something that's more forward looking. Today it might be, we help you stay above water, whatever that is. So focusing on your changing customer needs has proven to be extremely important, and something that I think will be true for a while. There's a really good quote from Miles Grody, the chief product officer at Upper Hand, on this subject too.
Most of our customers have been forced to shut their doors. So we've had to find new ways to really help them via our software. So this change in needs has really altered some of our team's day-to-day focus, but the overall mission hasn't changed. So it's more like positioning of the different products that we offer.
And so with Miles, this is been really challenging because some of his customers are gyms and are places that are just legally not allowed to be open. So their overall mission at Upper Hand hadn't changed, but they've had to really find new ways that they can be useful during that time. I may have already said there was one last point, but that was a lie. There's actually one last point on the insight of focusing on your customers, and that is existing customers are top priority. I can also say that from us, we're a services agency. Immediately when this happened, we made sure that all of our client teams that focus on clients were focusing on them exclusively. A lot of that is to help them. A lot of it is for our own business to make sure that we're serving them well. And I think we're seeing this a lot in the product realm. Really the reality is, let's just be honest. There's not a lot of new business coming in for a lot of companies around the world right now. Maybe if you're signing 5, new customers a month, that might be one every 6 weeks at this point. So when you're finding that challenging, you can think about spending a bunch of effort trying to find more, or really doubling down on the ones that you have. And you may be surprised to find that there's hidden opportunities there that you may not have seen, but at the very least, you make sure that as you come out of this recession that we're in, with a stronger customer base than you had going into it. Okay, insight number 2 of 4 is finding and sticking to your value. So I hinted at this before about the value prop, and I want to dive into it a little bit here because I think it was relevant before, but really what I want to talk about here is breaking it down to think about what is valuable about what you do. I would say on a weekly basis, I'm hearing product leaders actually look at what it is that they do and re-examine it. And if you're talking to your customers a lot, that's the outside perspective that you can take. I will even say from personal experience, if you just sit in the room with your own team members thinking, what else can we be? You're missing out on how the rest of the world sees you. So it's important to actually go out to customers. You might even go out to colleagues and sort of show them, tell them what you do, and have their outside opinion on what you do, because you may find that you are still valuable, but it's very different. I mentioned that before, how in a growth mindset where the economy is growing and we're all fat and happy and everything's great, we have value props of optimizing and scaling and growing, very aspirational. Today we're talking about feeling inundated, like saving time, like those sorts of things. So a lot of the things that you may provide in a product might still be useful today, but you actually need to figure out from your market, from talking to peers, what about that might change. The second part of finding and sticking to your value is really just staying above the noise and focusing your message. So as we're 2 months into this has died down a little bit, but for a lot of the last 2 months on LinkedIn and social, it's just inundated with messages around coronavirus and COVID-19, and that seemed to be the go-to thing. And truthfully, most companies didn't really need to even speak about this. We were, as consumers or customers in the broader world or citizens, getting inundated with messages, but only a small percentage of products really need to talk about what's going on and how it relates to what they provide you. So it can be tempting to also add another voice to something like this, but be aware that there's something that really does matter to your users, and that's what you provided them before. Now, the context of what's going on might have changed a little bit, but what you're providing shouldn't just latch onto that. So this one is about rising above what the noise is and figuring out what your message needs to be. And you may find that it is relevant to talk about what's going on, or you might find that, look, maybe it's not the coronavirus specifically, but the urgency that it's created for some of you in digital transformation spaces. So we're going to refocus our message on that. So anyway, whatever that looks like, as you've talked to your customers, looking at your market, you need to pay attention to how your value may have changed, and then really focus on that and not get caught up in what everybody else is saying. Here's Kirsten Moorfield, the Chief Product Officer at Cloverleaf, with more on that.
We've been really intentional to just say maybe a half a sentence to one full, maximum one sentence about, hey, we understand this is happening in this time. Whether it's, hey, maybe you're feeling isolated, or maybe your team's working remote for the first time ever, that type of stuff. And then we just move on to you, to talk about you, what do you need, what's happening in your life.
Side note, irrelevant, to any of this, I love how you can hear, Kirsten's child in the background. I think on Miles too, you can hear it too. Which, by the way, is doing this podcast and talking to people, it's been really interesting that, we've just sort of just like said, look, we're not trying to go for polished perfection on all of this, and it's been kind of funny to just hear the new sounds of the office with a lot of these interviews. But Kirsten's very specific. She's very specifically, in what she's talking about here is the virus, and talking about that and what they're allowing themselves to do. And, I'm connected with her on LinkedIn. I see a lot of the content that comes from her and Cloverleaf, and I can attest that, during this time, they were talking about their value prop, and you could notice subtle tweaks in it, but it wasn't referencing coronavirus specifically. So, what she's really talking about here kind of goes back to being authentic and looking for personal connection. So, keeping that message, close to what you do is really important. Okay, insight number 3, don't overreact. Okay, this is like telling somebody not to panic when they're panicking, but don't overreact. But there's more here. Sorry, let me clear my throat here. It's tempting, again, when you're looking at the way the market's shifting, when you're just watching lines of a stock market, go down and down and down, to think that everything is changing permanently. If you've ever talked to me privately, you may have heard my rant about how it can be tempting to project out long-term trends when you're in the middle of something so volatile. But that's what's happening now. Is there a lot of people, a lot of thought leaders, a lot of people that are claiming to know, what the new world is going to look like. I mean, there's no doubt that there's fundamental changes that are happening. Obviously, remote and virtual will continue to be more important, but the world doesn't shift, that monumentally to say that everything is going to be completely upended. It really still moves in sort of incremental, changes. So, with all this said of paying attention to your market, it's important to understand that, and we hear this from the leaders that we've talked to, that just because the world is changing doesn't mean that everything you're building necessarily needs to change. It can be tempting to think, well, I need to build this new feature to handle this sort of thing, but that can be very expensive. And given that we don't know how long this will last, and we also don't know what's permanently changing about this, it's advisable to not go starting to build something new that you think is going to be the new normal, because if you're wrong on that at a time like this, it can be even more expensive and take you further away from what it is that you truly provide. So keep that in mind as you hear this clip from Miles Grody, the CPO of Upper Hand again.
Drawing a clear line. There's product marketing strategy and there's product development strategy. And so I think it's really important to really point out the difference between the two, because our product development strategy hasn't changed whatsoever. We're still focused on the same stuff that we were focused on before. However, our product marketing strategy has definitely changed.
Yeah. So again, if you remember, serving gyms and fitness centers like Upper Hand does, you could see how it'd be very tempting to just start, creating a bunch of new stuff. But a lot of the stuff that they were doing for these places was digital to begin with. So some of these changes actually might help in that regard. Some of the landscape things that need to change to open the businesses are sort of out of their control. So this is a great example of what we're talking about. And I want to end it with, again, something I touched on a little bit earlier when it comes to not overreacting. Before I was talking about from a messaging standpoint, but it's really important when you think about this to avoid copying what other companies are doing. I'm guilty of looking sideways, being a part owner of an agency myself. I know a lot of product leaders are looking to other product leaders to learn from them. But what's important to understand, and why I wanted to do this, to give this summary of what we've heard, is not to copy, what everybody else does. This is a fundamental, business lesson, that you don't just copy the business model, you don't just copy the product moves of someone else without understanding the context within which they operate. Even as you heard Miles Grody, there's something there to take from that, but it doesn't mean that it may necessarily work for you. Kirsten Moorfield with Cloverleaf is working on software for teams that work remotely or in person. So a lot of the surrounding context doesn't really change that. And so some of the advice you may get from her may not affect an industry that you're in. Whereas when you think of Amy Brown and Authentics, serving the healthcare system, there's a lot of things there that she may be doing that may not be relevant to you. So it's ultimately about understanding what your users' needs are and your business impact is, and less about just saying, oh, that looks cool, let's go ahead and copy that. Again, advice for any product leader, but bears reiterating at a time like this. Okay, the last insight is acting short-term and thinking long-term. I wonder if I would consider this to be different today than I would have said, 3 months ago, because I think a lot of product leaders do a lot of things that act on the long term, and they also think longer term. But some of this is a little bit of a shift for people because they actually have to change what that looks like. Your 3-year window might become 1 year, and then your roadmap, for the quarter is just like, let's just figure out what we're doing in the next month. So the best advice that we're hearing from people is to stay opportunistic, be open. Don't stick so rigidly to what you're doing, and just maybe even throw some of your roadmap out the window. If you've been looking at the market and you've been talking to your customers, you will be open and see new opportunities. This is all about staying opportunistic there. Even if you hear about businesses that have pivoted, Instagram pivoting from bourbon. If you don't know that, go look it up. That's BURBN. Or if you don't know how some of these, past, Goliaths that we see today pivoted from something small, that's what's happening right now. And you may find that it's a temporary pivot of value you need to provide, or it could be something more permanent with more opportunity. But the whole point is to stay opportunistic about what you're seeing there, and don't say, oh, that would be really cool, but it doesn't fit with what we're trying to do. Again, think long term, but act in the short term. So you may visit your long term roadmap, later, but in the short term, you need to act now.
How we've stayed nimble during these changing times is that we've said collectively as a company that we're going to stay opportunistic. We're going to stay open to new ideas to how we can better support our customers in this post-COVID world. So
that was Ryan Chan, the CEO and founder at Upkeep, which makes software for maintenance people that work in facilities and large buildings. So this is a really good segue into this point about focusing on what you can control. So there's a lot of things with this crisis that you can't control, myself included. I've had my own anxieties, my own worries reading the news, and it can be overwhelming to think about what all of this affects you. And if you're tasked with strategy and long-term perspective, it can be really hard to say, what are all the dots that I need to connect and how should that affect our priorities? But it's really important that you look at that and figure out what's under your control and what's not. That should really help simplify your mindset when you think about the things that you do with your product, that a lot of the things that go on right now maybe don't necessarily have to affect what you do on a day-to-day basis. They're just helpful context, but you need to prioritize based off of what we've talked about so far, which you're hearing that's changing in your market and with your customers, before you start worrying about the things that you can't actually change. So this is Ryan Chain again, giving some more context on that.
We know that at some point there is going to be a turn towards normalcy. And for us, we want to focus on the things that we can control. There's so much doom and gloom when you read the news. And for us, we basically said, we're going to focus on three things. We're going to focus on our mindset. So every day when we come to work, what is our mindset? And do we have an optimistic, are we positive? The second thing that we're going to focus on is our effort. How much effort do we put in every single day? And the third piece is, what are we doing for our customers and continue to stay committed to our customers in the long term.
I love that because Ryan also talks about the day-to-day, aspects, just staying positive at work, which is a really great way to sort of end this, which is that there is hope in the chaos. We've asked everybody we've had on the show, what they're hopeful for, and one thing that underlies all of it is that if you're listening to this and you're involved in this industry, we're part of the lucky, privileged, industry of tech. In the future is going to be tech oriented. The silver lining to all of this is that it's forcing a lot of things to adapt and evolve in ways that are beneficial to everybody. We're looking at how tech can help in the world that we're in now and in the world that we will be in tomorrow. And even for your own business, as you're looking at your product roadmap, understanding that the future, there is a lot of hope there. There's a lot of storms we have to weather in the short term, but ultimately what you're doing is going to be a value add and even more valuable in the years that precede than it was before. So I hope this was helpful to hear these insights sort of collected. These are some things that we're hearing, and we're still doing the podcast and talking to product leaders about what we're doing. And if you're interested in that, I strongly urge you to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching this video, I encourage you to go to betterproduct.community/podcast to see some of our past episodes and see what's coming up next. And if you're listening to this or watching this and you aren't already a part of the Better Product community, go to betterproduct.community and sign up. I think now more than ever, product professionals are looking for connections and resources, and we're trying to provide that even more than we were before. We're definitely hoping to get back to in-person events soon, but in the meantime, we'll be hosting more digital events, more exclusive events for community members to connect you all, to connect you with premium content and some of the thought leaders in the world. So again, head over to betterproduct.community and sign up.